This is from the United Press from Dallas. President Kennedy and Governor John Connally have been cut down by assassins' bullets in downtown Dallas.
Ever since President John F. Kennedy was gunned down by Lee Harvey Oswald on November 22, 1963 in Dallas, questions have surfaced on whether Oswald worked alone, such as who was that random guy with an umbrella? Some crazy ideas have been cooked up about him over the years. According to Smithsonian Magazine, more than half of the American public believes in some kind of Kennedy assassination conspiracy theory, and they're pretty wild. Some allege that there was another shooter, based on a recording that seems to capture the sound of a fourth shot from the so-called grassy knoll. Oswald's gun is another source of speculation, considered by some to be too hard for him to use alone to kill the president.
So you take this Carcano, world's worst shoulder weapon, and you try to hit a moving target at 88 yards through heavy foliage? No way.
Or maybe Oswald was working with powerful entities, the American military, Lyndon B. Johnson, or even the mob, all of whom had their reasons for wanting Kennedy dead, right? Really though, a lot of these theories have been debunked, but they go to show why the speculation surrounding the Umbrella Man isn't all that surprising. In the JFK assassination, one key piece of evidence comes up often: the Zapruder film, the 26 seconds of footage capturing the moment of Kennedy's assassination. When that film was made available to the American public, it was pretty devastating to the country at large. But conspiracy theorists pore over those 486 frames of footage looking for anything out of the ordinary, and their incessant searching has dug up some pretty weird details. A 1978 article called The Umbrella System: Prelude to an Assassination examined those specific frames that include the shooting. It lined up Kennedy's movements with the shots, but some strange things were discovered. At one point, Kennedy's hand moves forward, despite a bullet hitting him in such a way that should have thrown him backwards. As the other bullets hit him, his fists are clenched tight and never loosening, his body mostly stiff. In contrast, Governor John Connally, who was also hit in the attack but recoiled and fell to the floor, much more movement than was seen from Kennedy. Oh, and then there was a small hole found in Kennedy's neck. Maybe an exit wound, but also maybe not. The more people took a look, the more one other strange little detail stood out from the Zapruder film. It had rained earlier that morning of November 22nd in Dallas, but by the time the president's motorcade was to pass through the city, the skies had cleared. It was a beautiful day in the city, a mild 68 degrees and sunny. Keeping that in mind, it really makes one man in the Zapruder film stand out. As Josiah Thompson explains in a short film by Errol Morris, there's a person holding an open black umbrella in the same place where the shots hit Kennedy. This one young man is the only person in the entire crowd with an open umbrella, but why? It's a sunny, pleasant day, one that shouldn't call for an umbrella. But he's standing there just feet from where the president has been shot. It's definitely really weird, and that makes it easy to assume that there's something sinister behind the mystery. Okay, so we know that the Umbrella Man was there at Kennedy's assassination, mere feet from where everything went down, but was he involved in the murder of the president? And if so, how? One early theory, explained by Josiah Thompson and Richard Sprague, does have the Umbrella Man involved in the JFK assassination, but he wasn't there to pull a weapon on the president. Basically, he was an accomplice, according to this theory. The umbrella was supposedly meant as a way for him to communicate with the actual shooter, or shooters, if one believes Oswald wasn't the only person firing on the president that day. Opening the umbrella was the signal to shoot the first time. Raising it higher was the signal for the second round of shots. It's an interesting theory, but Sprague actually debunks it himself. Turns out the Umbrella Man was raising and lowering his umbrella way too quickly for it to function as any sort of helpful signal, especially for shooters at a distance. The Umbrella System article points out that as Kennedy's car passes by, the Umbrella Man doesn't turn his head to watch. Instead, he rotates his umbrella almost like he's tracking Kennedy's movements with it, which leads us to the wild theory that the umbrella was a gun. There was actually umbrella gun technology in development at the time. Documentation is out there on poison dart shooters that could be fitted into things like canes, pens, and, you guessed it, umbrellas. Schematics for the umbrella version actually were drawn up to prove the point. Essentially, the technology worked through an electronic trigger, and when the umbrella was open, a tube-shaped launcher could shoot a dart. But when the umbrella was closed, the launcher would fold up with the ribs of the umbrella. All told, the theory goes that the Umbrella Man opened his umbrella to shoot Kennedy with a poison-tipped dart, hence why he seemed to be tracking Kennedy as the motorcade went by. The dart hit Kennedy in the neck, creating a small hole, not an exit wound, and quickly paralyzing him. It left him stiff and a sitting duck for the lethal gunshots that followed. So let's just go with the assumption that the umbrella was actually a gun, because if you take this theory as valid, the implications go deeper. Just think about it. Where would this seemingly random man get tech like this? The answer could be the Army or even the CIA.
It could have happened that way, couldn't it?
The umbrella system mentions some of the early history of these dart launchers, with the first introduction to the US government taking place in front of Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty in his office at the Pentagon in 1960. Further development began later that year, but all of it was conducted as top-secret research, bringing in people from the Special Forces and the CIA. By the time of Kennedy's assassination a few years later, only a small group of individuals from those two organizations knew anything about these weapons. No one else, the theory alleges, could have gotten their hands on it. But the Umbrella Man supposedly did. And if the confidential nature of the weapon wasn't weird enough, then there's the argument that the Umbrella Man, just because of his behavior, should have been questioned that day. A potential weapon or weapon concealer shouldn't have been allowed that close to a parade path at all. The Secret Service apparently didn't care, and he was allowed to leave the scene without questioning. 15 years. That's what it took. 15 years of speculation before the Umbrella Man finally revealed himself as Louis Stephen Witt. Witt officially testified regarding the events of that day to the House Select Committee on Assassinations, or HSCA. And according to his 1978 testimony, the entire story was a lot less interesting than what many other people had made themselves believe. Witt simply wasn't a fan of the Kennedy family. Explaining that he leaned more conservative, he didn't particularly like that there was a liberal president in the White House. So on the day of the parade, he took this big, clunky black umbrella with him to heckle the president. Just a little bit of a protest, really. He'd chosen to stand where he did because it was a tad less busy in that area, and he was a private person who didn't want to be asked by everyone around him why he was opening an umbrella. Plus, it would be easier for this president to see his little protest. With his testimony having come to light, it appears Witt's presence was just some really unfortunate timing. He did happen to open the umbrella at roughly the same moment the president was shot, but he wasn't involved in the actual killing. Oh, and he also brought the umbrella to court with him. It was opened and inspected to prove that it was, in fact, only an umbrella. This whole idea of waving around a black umbrella to heckle the president probably sounds a little strange, but the historical context really does help us understand the whole thing. According to the Washington Post, the umbrella was meant as a symbolic protest against the entire Kennedy family. That's because John F. Kennedy's father, Joseph Kennedy, was a supporter of British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, notorious for appeasing Hitler, as well as for carrying around a black umbrella. This was not a popular association to have, and all Kennedys got lumped into this tainted legacy by their protesters. So people who disliked the family showed it by waving around black umbrellas at them. It actually happened once with a whole crowd at an airport. Louis Witt himself, though, wasn't aware of the full context. In his testimony, he said he only knew about it in a general sense, that it had something to do with Joseph Kennedy and was a, quote, sore spot for the family. But why didn't Witt speak out shortly after the assassination? Did he have something to hide? Again, no. The truth was so much simpler. According to Witt, in his testimony to the HSCA, he and his family were just very private people. What's more, he actually had no idea about the conspiracy theories involving his umbrella. He only found out by chance in 1978 because he happened to see talk of it in the newspapers and recognized himself in the photos. He realized that people were looking for him, but he didn't go directly to the FBI. He frankly didn't want the attention. Plus, he knew that word would probably get out anyway and that someone would eventually come looking for him. Even with Louis Witt's testimony, some have thought that he was involved in other conspiracies. The umbrella system makes mention of radio chatter going on that day in Dealey Plaza, with a man named Jim Hicks claiming to have provided radios to a firing team. Communication fell to another man, presumably found in the Zapruder film, with hand raised and holding a button radio at his belt. After the shooting, he sat down next to Witt for a couple of minutes. It was assumed that the two were working together. Witt's testimony disproves this, obviously, but he was still questioned about that other man. As far as Witt could remember, the man had just said something about Kennedy being shot, but he didn't recall anything suspicious. As for whether or not this man had a radio, Witt explained that he probably didn't, but Witt had also been in shock at the time. Then there's the question of another potential shooter on the so-called grassy knoll behind a retaining wall. Witt was also questioned about that, since he was in the same area, but the wall was behind him, so he couldn't see much. At the end of all this, there's a moral worth taking from the story of the Umbrella Man and the conspiracies surrounding him. After all, if you look at the entire journey this conspiracy took, it's pretty crazy. A man shows up with an umbrella to display a little annoyance with the Kennedy family, ends up a witness to an assassination, and then has conspiracy theorists trying to turn him into an accomplice. These theories also had him connected to the CIA, possibly in possession of a secret weapon that shoots poisonous, dissolving darts. Josiah Thompson summarizes it best. He says that when you're looking at the surface of any issue, things are going to look completely normal. But once you start digging around in the details, things start to get much weirder. And that's not just with an event like a presidential assassination. It's true of anything. Every story has its own weird little details that could spawn conspiracies if someone felt like looking hard enough. And once you find those details, it's so much easier to come up with sinister explanations like top secret CIA weapons rather than what might be true, like a weird, somewhat outdated form of political protest. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.